The sound of the slap cracked against the rain-soaked pavement, making the entire crowd flinch. Cole stepped in close, a cruel smile curling on his lips. "Get on your knees. Apologize. Maybe I'll let it slide." The woman slowly wiped the blood from her mouth and answered in a cold, flat voice, "Slap me again. See what happens." The air grew heavy, choked with tension. Every camera locked on to that moment. The instant power was openly defied. The street was silent at midnight, drowned in a thick curtain of rain with heavy droplets falling steadily onto the dark pavement, merging with the red and blue lights from the police car, sweeping across empty spaces, making the road look like it wore a ghostly shroud. A siren tore through the night, then cut off suddenly, leaving a chilling silence. The patrol car halted right in the middle of the road, blocked the narrow path like a cold barrier. Its headlights fixed on the figure of a woman jogging, casting her shadow long and twisted on the wet ground, distorted like a fresh carving pressed down by a blade. The car door flung open, the dry screech of the hinge slicing through the rain like metal snapping, and from it stepped a tall figure, the kind more used to giving orders than speaking. Sergeant Cole emerged with his usual arrogant demeanor, his steps heavy but deliberate, his eyes filled with contempt as he sized up the black woman who had come to a stop in the road. His hand rested loosely on his baton, a casual gesture that masked a quiet threat, as if any wrong move would trigger a strike. The car's light reflected off his face, sharpening the proud creases and imagined scars of a man who believed he was the law. His voice came out hoarse, thick with authority. "Wandering around this late. In this neighborhood, someone black like you is already a problem." Maya Carter stopped, her body tense from the long run. Her chest heaved, breath ragged at first, but slowly, steadying her heart, pounding slower now, but still heavy, sinking with the rain that fell relentlessly on her soaked shoulders. She lifted her head into the harsh white beam of the headlights, rain streaking down her cheeks like smeared ink, yet her eyes stayed bright, unwavering. It wasn't a look of avoidance or fear, but one that stared straight through, silent, yet weighted enough to make the man facing her feel like he was looking into a mirror that reflected the darkest parts of himself. Across the street, a few scattered figures began to appear, footsteps that had rushed to escape the rain, now slowed, drawn in by the strange tension. They paused, under Eve's clothes wet, faces caught between curiosity and unease. Some cautiously raised their phones, blue screens flickering like fireflies through the downpour. Shaky lenses, trying to stay steady, aimed at the charged distance between the officer and the woman. The silence took over, broken only by the rain and the fading echo of distant sirens, leaving behind a breathless pressure that had no name. Cole looked at her lips curling into a mocking smirk. He stepped closer, and the sound of his leather shoes scraping the wet pavement was dry and jarring like a blade dragged across metal. The rain kept falling, but he didn't seem to notice each drop, soaking into his shoulders and sliding down his jawline, sharpening his menacing presence. His eyes burned with arrogance like a man looking down from a podium at his prey. He gave a harsh, guttural laugh with mockery. "Suspicious is the softest word I could use. This place isn't meant for someone like you. Everything has rules, and I am the rule." The rain began to pour harder, turning the road slick like glass, reflecting streaks of red and blue light in blurred swaths. The crowd across the street seemed to forget the rain slamming into them, their eyes locked on the scene unfolding before them. Phones trembled in their hands, not just from the water, but from the tension thickening in the air. The woman stood silent, but that silence weighed more than any reply, a solid wall that made Cole uneasy. He clenched his teeth, breath-ragged veins pulsing at his temples. He was used to quick apologies, quick explanations, bowed heads, and frightened eyes. But now, Maya's stillness turned into a reversed blade, fueling a rage he had kept bottled too long. Cole moved in closer now, only a few steps away, the stale scent of old tobacco and damp leather settling in the space between them. His hand gripped the baton, tighter knuckles pale, like he was waiting for the smallest excuse to strike. Maya's gaze didn't waver, not a blink, not a twitch, only that cold steel resolve. That image burned into the cameras pointed at them, and the people behind the lenses understood this was no routine ID check. This was a historic fracture, the moment where abused power and quiet defiance were seconds away from a violent collision. The rain pounded the rooftop in burst droplets, slapping the ground with a force that only heightened the tension. The woman stood still in the red and blue glow, like a statue, calm on the surface, but burning within, while Cole unraveled by the second his stare, hard and twisted by contempt that met no fear in return. A faint smile crept to the corner of Maya's lips, but her eyes stayed razor-sharp, their calm chilling. The crowd swallowed hard, every person knowing that any second now could mark the beginning of something they never thought they'd witness with their own eyes. The entire street seemed to hold its breath, red and blue lights flashing in pulses, rain tapping relentlessly against the pavement like a drumbeat, driving toward something inevitable. Cole tilted his head, his eyes wide like a predator locked on its target, and his hoarse voice cut through the rain. "You think silence scares me tonight? I'll show you who really makes the rules here." He stepped closer, his shadow falling over the slim, rain-soaked figure in front of him. In an instant, a bolt of lightning split the sky, lighting up the scene with a flash that made the tension nearly unbearable. Every eye was locked in place, every heartbeat sinking with each motion, and everyone understood that a fire had just touched the edge of eruption. Rain poured heavily, drumming steadily on the pavement, its sound echoing through the city like thousands of tiny needles pricking the skin, deepening the cold in the air. Under the dull glow of a street lamp, the water struck the slick pavement, reflecting the silhouettes of two people facing each other a short distance, stretched tight like a drawn string. Sergeant Cole stepped forward again, his shadow extending across the asphalt, merging with the red and blue flashes still blinking behind the patrol car. He leaned in, his voice dropping into a hiss through clenched teeth, the words rough and sharp like a blade slicing the air. "You think wearing athletic gear looking like a soldier makes your skin color equal?" It wasn't a question meant for an answer. It was a strike away to assert that every breath still belonged to his control. Maya Carter didn't rush to respond. She drew a deep breath and raised a hand to adjust the hair tie slipping loose from the rain. That small gesture, made in the middle of rising tension, was like a silent challenge, as if she was brushing off the venom in his words. Her eyes remained bright under the dim light, reflecting the faint yellow glow while holding firm clarity. The crowd across the street stared, hearts pounding wildly in their chests, knowing that any word from her could trigger an explosion, yet her calmness only made Cole more agitated. He raised his eyebrows, arrogance spreading across his face where raindrops seemed to sharpen the twisted grin playing at his lips. Cole let out a harsh laugh, a guttural rasp that echoed in the night like a saw, grinding wood sharp and grating. He straightened up, his eyes glinting with challenge, then released another string of words dripping with contempt. "Around here, we are the law. People like you are just shadows. Got it?" Each word landed heavy, falling like stones onto the pavement, deliberately crushing the silence Maya had held. The crowd flinched a few, stepping back as if the insult had struck them directly. But Maya's gaze didn't shift. She tilted her head slightly, the rain slicing into her cheek with a frozen sting. Her body coiled in patience, though deep in her eyes a fire had begun to rise. A cold gust swept through, scattering a few rain-soaked scraps of paper across the sidewalk, swirling into the space between the two facing figures, making the already heavy atmosphere even more suffocating. The person filming from across the street felt goosebumps rise along their arms, struggling to keep their phone steady, but it was Cole's voice that sent the real chill down their spine. It wasn't an ordinary statement. It sounded like a sentence handed down by someone who believed they had the right to decide another's fate. Those standing close enough to hear every word clearly were breathless, some covering their mouths in fear, others murmuring, as if trying to will him to stop. Yet, the calmer that gaze remained, the more furious Cole became, driven by a need to prove that her defiance meant nothing. He stepped forward again, rain splashing beneath his heel, his broad shoulders blocking out the weak yellow glow above, casting a shadow that swallowed Maya. His voice no longer mocked it, rumbled like thunder. Let me make it clear, no one lifts their head around here unless I say so. You standing there like a statue, you're just decoration, nothing more than a drifting shadow. His words spilled out, tangled with ragged breath, and the stale scent of old tobacco soaking into the damp air. A raindrop slid from Maya's brow across the bridge of her nose and down to her chin, but she didn't raise a hand to wipe it away. Her eyes locked onto his, a flash of steel, meat and steel tightening the tension in the space around them. The crowd stayed at a distance, no one daring to speak, but their silence only amplified Cole's voice. He knew they were filming. He saw the shaking lenses, but instead of fear, he saw a stage. He wanted to prove that even when being watched, he was still the law, still holding absolute power. Time stretched, filled only by the sound of rain, the breathless rhythm of the onlookers, and the pounding of Maya's heart. Yet nothing in her gaze changed. She didn't need to speak. Each breath she took was already an act of resistance. Cole pressed his lips together, fingers tapping the baton's handle, his eyes glinting like someone who had grown used to feeding off the fear of others. He spoke more slowly now. Each word dropped like a weight. You might think you're special, but around here, I decide who stands tall and who stays bowed. The crowd shuddered at the words, some whispering prayers, others turning away afraid of what was about to unfold. But at that exact moment, a stronger gust cut through rain, slamming hard onto the pavement, and in that brief charged pause, Maya's figure remained upright, astonishingly calm. The air thickened in the narrow street, the smell of rain mixed with damp metal, the distant hum of cars blending with the sound of water pounding on tin roofs, all of it forming a soundtrack to the confrontation erupting before them. The black woman still stood firm, her eyes glowing like two slow-burning flames, while the white officer sank deeper into his own rage. His voice slammed out like a hammer. Around here I am the law, and you, Maya Carter, are just a passerby. You challenge that, you pay for it. He tilted his head, breathing hard, eyes burning with venom as if ready to consume her whole. But in her eyes, he saw only a wall of silence, and that silence became the sharpest reply, turning the rainy night into something on the edge of shattering into thousands of splinters. The atmosphere thickened as if on the verge of shattering, the sound of another patrol car's siren fading into the distance, leaving behind a chilling void, filled only with the pounding rain and the rapid heartbeat of every onlooker. The yellow street lamp cast its weak light over the slick pavement, reflecting a scene so tense it felt suffocating. Cole stood in front of Maya, his breath heavier from restrained anger, a flash of fury in his eyes, his hand tightening before it suddenly swung upward. The crack of the slap cut through the night sharp as a whip lashing stone, sending shock across the street. The force of his palm snapped Maya's face to one side. Her rain-soaked hair flung loose strands clinging to her cheek, tangled in streaks of rain mixing with a fresh red mark. Time seemed to freeze, each raindrop slowing in the eyes of those watching, then crashing down in unison like a war drum pushing everything forward. A scream broke from the crowd as sharp as the slap itself. "Oh my God," he hit her. The words rang out, not just as an exclamation, but like a bell smashing through the glass, silence that had cloaked the street. Others in the crowd jolted, some dropping their hands from their mouths, others raising their phones higher, their lenses shaken but fixed. Everyone understood instantly. They had just witnessed something that would not end with a single meaningless act, but ignite a fire capable of burning through the false cover that had long shielded those used to unchecked power. Fear and fury fused in that instant, locking into a moment that made each person tremble, knowing this was the point of no return. Maya tilted her head slightly, her cheek still marked red from the slap, but her gaze never left her opponent. Hair hung against her face, rain running in rivulets blurring the mark left by the strike. Yet in her eyes burned an impossible steadiness. She didn't step back, didn't flinch. Her breath stayed even, her lips pressed tight, saying nothing but delivering an answer louder than words. That composure didn't satisfy Cole. It hit him like a cold wave washing over the arrogance he had worn like armor. In that look, he saw a challenge unlike any he had faced through years of authority, and the very quiet of it left him feeling cornered. Cole drew in a sharp breath, eyes wide, his voice grinding through clenched teeth, thrown out like an order from someone who believed himself to be the law. Get on your knees, apologize, and maybe I'll let it go. The rough sound cut through the rain like thunder slamming into the crowd's ears, making them shiver. It wasn't a warning, it was a sentence, a demand for submission shouted in a public street under the fixed eyes of numerous witnesses. That sentence stood like a blade dividing the line between the one who commands and the one forced to obey, a blatant challenge to every standard of justice the law is meant to uphold. Cole stood solid, hand gripping the baton, eyes locked on the woman before him, daring her to choose between submission and destruction. The rain kept pouring, each drop striking their skin like needles, but nothing drowned out the rising tension. The crowd held its breath. The patrol lights flickered and murmurs mixed with the drumbeat of falling rain. A few holding phones whispered unconsciously as if urging the woman not to bow, though no one dared speak aloud. That slap and the humiliation that followed was no longer a burst of anger from a bitter cop. It had become a symbol of abusive power, a public insult the witnesses knew couldn't be buried quietly. In that moment, the small street became an arena, one side defined by domination, the other standing tall in silent defiance. Maya took a deep breath, her shoulders trembling not from fear but from the weight of the moment pressing down. Her eyes stared directly into Cole's, not dodging, not breaking, pouring all her strength into silence as if to tell him that no slap could strip away a person's dignity. In that look, the onlookers saw a wordless resistance, something that made their hearts pound and locked the memory into their minds. Cole saw it too, and it enraged him further yet. In that same silence, the first crack appeared in the armor of authority he wore. He thought the slap would bring her to her knees, collapse her completely, but what stood before him was a face held high, marked red, but still proud, still daring, still challenging every overheated nerve in his skull. The entire scene compressed into a breathless mass, the sound of rain shoes grinding on asphalt and the hammering hearts of the crowd all blending into a tense, inescapable rhythm. Cole narrowed his eyes, lips curling slightly, but in his gaze flickered something close to doubt, something he tried to smother instantly with more anger. He wanted to prove it again, crush the silence with another blow to reaffirm his absolute power. But in that split second, Maya's steady stare turned silence into a blade sharper than anything spoken, cutting deep into Cole's arrogance before he could even understand it had pierced him. In the rainy night, the yellow light cast down like a thin veil, wrapping around the two figures facing each other. The crowd was overwhelmed by tension so thick it was hard to breathe. That slap hadn't just rung in their ears, it had etched itself into their minds, becoming a mark, a wound the city would struggle to forget. Maya still stood there, motionless, like stone hair falling across her face, her eyes never leaving the man who was shouting. It was not the gaze of someone defeated, but the gaze of someone ready to turn patience into a blade of resistance. And in that moment, the people holding phones understood that what they were recording was not just a random clip, but evidence, a spark, the ignition of a wave that even Cole could never have imagined the power of. The rain fell harder by the second, heavy drops, hammering the glistening pavement, echoing in steady, oppressive thuds that made the air feel even tighter. Steam rose, wrapping a hazy layer around the police car's lights, turning the scene into a cold, damp cage where every gaze locked on the two figures facing each other. Maya's face still bore the red imprint of the violent slap, a thin trace of blood seeping from the corner of her mouth, blending with the rain running down her chin. She raised her hand slowly, wiping the red away without breaking eye contact. There was no bowing, no wavering, only a quiet pride that made every movement feel like a silent act of defiance. Cole stared, his breath rising in white clouds under the cold, his facial muscles twitching with suppressed rage. He expected fear tremble in a choked apology, but instead he faced a calm so unshaken that even the watching crowd held their breath. Maya's lips curved slightly, a faint smile, sharp enough to slice into his pride. Her voice came low and steady, each word cutting through the rain. "You think a slap can crush the truth?" It wasn't loud, but in the thick silence it carried far reach in the people huddled across the street, making them shiver. That question hit like a blade turned inward. Cole clenched his teeth, his temples pulsing. He stepped closer, so near their foreheads nearly touched his breath, reeking of stale tobacco pouring straight into her face. His voice came out in a harsh snarl full of threat. "Tonight, I'll teach you what order means." The words dropped like a verdict, soaked in the fury of someone who had grown used to enforcing control. His eyes were wild red veins standing out, his free hand clenching the baton so tightly his muscles tensed, ready for another strike. Across the street, those filming trembled so badly their screens wobbled, but none lowered their phones. Some swallowed hard, throats dry from tension. Others clutched a friend's sleeve, but all held their ground. They knew this wasn't just an argument, they were witnessing a truth too heavy to bury. And so, hands shaking, hearts racing, they kept recording, letting their lenses catch every detail. In their eyes, Maya stood there, small under the storm, yet carrying a silent strength as she faced the towering man screaming before her. The rain grew heavier, pooling across the street into wide puddles that reflected the flashing lights of the patrol car. The shadows of the two figures stretched across the wet ground, blurred and interwoven like an inky stain impossible to separate. Cole, towering and aggressive, radiated dominance, while Maya, compact and silent, stood upright and unflinching. That contrast created a suffocating pressure so intense that even those watching from a distance felt like they were being pushed against a wall. As Cole's words faded, silence returned, not one of fear, but of resistance, heavy and unshakable. Maya blinked, letting the rain fall against her lashes and run down her swollen cheek, but her eyes remained fierce. She didn't step back, didn't look away, holding her ground like an unmovable marker. She didn't argue or plead. Her stillness alone was a challenge to everything Cole believed he could control. And the more he stared at that silence, the more Cole felt cornered, not as the one in power, but as someone losing it. Rain beat against his shoulders, cold and sharp, but the fire inside him roared hotter, burning through his last traces of composure. The crowd grew larger, hurried footsteps pausing beneath awnings, wide-eyed stares locked onto the scene. Some raised their phones with shaking hands, some whispered prayers, but none looked away. Maya's silence had become the center of it all, turning Cole's threats into something heavy and hollow. Inside, those watching something began to rise. The sense that they were witnessing a moment they would remember forever, a moment they would later speak of as proof that truth had stood its ground. Cole leaned forward, his voice thick and threatening. "You think you can keep standing like this forever?" Eventually, they all bow. But as he spoke, Maya's eyes stayed steady, her stare unwavering, and his words seemed to vanish before they could land. In that moment, everyone watching understood her silence was a blade cutting straight into the pride of the man trying to dominate her. And it was that silence, more than any scream or strike, that delivered the most powerful resistance, leaving Cole shouting into a void he could no longer control. The rain didn't stop, and the police car's lights blurred beneath the rising steam, but the image of the two figures remained unmistakably clear. One raging and forceful, the other silent, firm, unbroken. That opposition turned the street into an arena, and every witness could feel they were seeing something far beyond a simple confrontation. They looked at one another, no words spoken yet. All of them understood they could not let this moment fade into silence. In the rainy night, Maya Carter's silence echoed louder than any scream, spreading across the space and reaching into the hearts of everyone huddled beneath the awnings. It was not the silence of submission. It was the silence of someone who knew their worth and refused to let it be trampled. And in that moment, as Cole growled with rage as the crowd trembled and stared wide-eyed, it was that very silence that became the most powerful declaration, making the thick, heavy air of the rainy night feel as if it were about to explode into an unstoppable wave. A bolt of lightning split the sky, flashing for a moment over the rain-soaked scene, casting everything in sharp relief and leaving the entire crowd breathless. The crack of thunder that followed shook the ground, merging with the pounding hearts of those gathered across the street. Cole clenched his teeth, his broad hand raised high, ready to deliver a second slap, this one driven by rage that had only multiplied. His eyes were bloodshot veins bulging along his arm, his face twisted with fury. He stood like a wall, ready to crush any trace of defiance. It wasn't just about humiliating the woman in front of him. He wanted everyone filming to see that nothing could shake his authority on this street. But before the hand could fall, something unexpected happened. Maya Carter raised her arm quick and firm, stopping the blow mid-air. Her eyes lit up through the curtain of rain, cold and sharp, like a blade slicing through the dark. The touch wasn't violent, but it was final enough to halt his strike an inch before impact. Cole froze for a split second, feeling as though he'd slammed into an invisible wall. In that brief stillness, he met Maya's gaze, a look that cooled his rage like ice to flame. It wasn't the look of someone overpowered, but of someone who had walked the edge between life and death and returned knowing exactly what truth weighs. Cole growled, teeth grinding his body, pulled taut like a wire about to snap. But before he could say a word, Maya reached into the pocket of her soaked training jacket and pulled out something bright. In the flash of another bolt overhead, a silver badge caught the light, gleaming through the thick night. She held it up to his face without a tremble, a blade aimed at the pride no one had ever dared to confront. The light from the badge reflected on Cole's face, cutting through his rage, and for a moment his expression broke. Maya's voice rang out, clear and cold as steel, each word slicing through the heavy air like a razor. "Slap me again. See what happens." She didn't need to shout it, pierced the rain and reached every ear in the crowd straining to hear. The sentence echoed like a second thunderclap, not from the sky, but from the center of the street, freezing the entire scene in place. Each syllable felt carved into stone, unshakable, unforgettable. People saw the chill in her eyes, the challenge in her stance, and the pride in the way she held that badge high. In that moment, the street seemed to hold its breath, every eye focused on the silver ball getting the light of street lights and lightning. Phones were raised higher, frames shaking but locked tightly on every detail. A young college student under an awning whispered, eyes wide, "Oh God, she's..." Then, like a wave crashing, the crowd erupted. Gasps, murmurs, sharp breaths. Someone shouted through the rain, "Oh my God, that's FBI. No internal affairs." The cry echoed, sparking a ripple of voices, each one offering a different version, but all filled with the same emotion, total disbelief. Cole froze his hand, still suspended mid-air, eyes fixed on the badge. His face turned pale in the flickering light, the tension in his features twisting further under the weight of shock he could no longer hide. The truth hit him like a bucket of ice water, dousing the fire of his rage, locking every muscle in place. For years, he had lived in command, used to bowed heads, silence when he walked by, the fear his presence carried. But now the woman he had slapped, the one he tried to humiliate in the middle of the street, was holding before him the symbol of a power greater than his, one capable of flipping the entire game he thought he controlled. The crowd buzzed louder. Some turned to whisper, others stepped back, as if trying to escape the storm of tension building between them. A few covered their mouths, eyes wet with emotion, while others gasped, unable to believe what they were seeing. The image of Maya Carter standing in the rain, hair soaked her cheek, still marked by a red slap, but her hand holding high a gleaming badge burned itself into their memory like a symbol that would never fade. Her earlier silence was now clear. She wasn't just a passerby, nor a victim, but the one carrying a truth Cole had never faced. Maya kept her gaze locked on his, calm but sharp, cutting through the layers of manufactured power he wore. She didn't raise her voice, nor did she soften it. Every word came crisp and certain. "Slap me again. See what happens." The sentence echoed through the minds of everyone present like a verdict, a warning not just for Cole, but for the system behind him. Cole stepped back half a pace, not because he was pushed, but because his foot lost its grip. In that instant, he was no longer the man given orders, but the one exposed, standing face to face with a truth he could no longer deny. The rain kept pouring in sheets, steam still clouding the light, but at the center of it all, two figures stood out with undeniable clarity. A white cop, his face contorted with shock and fury, and a black woman, blood still trailing from her lip, eyes burning like torches, hand raised with a badge, the symbol of justice he would never reach. That contrast froze the crowd for a few seconds, then broke into a wave of noise, a storm of sounds filled with fear and exhilaration. Everyone understood that from this moment on, the story was no longer a street confrontation. It was the beginning of a storm strong enough to rip away every layer of dust hiding the truth. In a cafe open through the night, warm yellow lights fell over old wooden tables, steam rising from coffee cups forming delicate rings that floated in the air. Outside the window, rain kept pouring, each drop hitting the metal roof and sliding down the glass in streaks that blurred the view like 1,000 smudged brush strokes. Inside, the sound of typing and spoons stirring cups broke the stillness until it was shattered by the sharp crack of a slap playing from a phone in the center of the table. 5 students sat in a circle, their faces lit by the cold blue of the screen, tense and frozen. The clip showed Cole striking Maya, the crisp sound hitting their ears like a whip, freezing everyone at the table in silence. No one spoke, only wide eyes, short breaths, and a quiet rise in anger. The moment seemed frozen for a few seconds before one student, curly-haired and visibly shaken, typed quickly on his phone, "Slap me again, people need to see this." His fingers moved fast, eyes locked on the screen, his voice low and urgent, like he feared the moment might slip away. With the final tap, the video is uploaded. Its title is simple, but enough to stop anyone scrolling. All eyes stayed on the screen, watching the share icon blink, the view count climbing second by second, like numbers on a clock racing forward. Another student whispered voice, trembling but firm, "This won't be buried, not tonight." Within minutes, the first signs exploded. Hundreds of shares lit up across platforms, the numbers rising so fast that even they couldn't believe it. Comments flooded in, overflowing with fury. Lines typed in rushed frustration, some riddled with typos from shaken hands, but the message was clear. People would not accept a woman being slapped in the street, especially not by someone in uniform. The questions came in waves. Who is he? Who is she? Why did this happen? Around the screen, the students exchanged looks, a mix of adrenaline and fear, knowing that in the instant they hit share, they had helped push a spark beyond the cafe walls, letting it catch fire across an entire city. Then Maya's line echoed in the clip, first once, then again, and then dozens of times as viewers rewound it, "Slap me again. See what happens." Every word was clear, defiant, and embedded itself in the minds of those listening. It was no longer a personal response, it had become a declaration. People began editing, captioning, and turning the quote into memes and images that spread across social media. On a black background, bold white letters appeared beneath them. The image of Maya's hand holding up the gleaming silver badge. On a red backdrop, another photo emerged, her eyes shining in the rain paired with bold gold text, "See what happens." These visuals were shared at lightning speed, accompanied by thousands of angry emojis and cries for justice. In the cafe, the atmosphere shifted. A server froze tray in hand after catching the clip playing on a customer's screen, standing still for a few seconds as if mesmerized by the moment. At the next table, 2 middle-aged men turned and asked quietly, "What's going on?" And when they heard the slap crack through the video, their faces turned turned pale. In moments, the whole cafe was swept into the current, every eye locked on the screen on the image of the black woman standing tall in the rain facing down a violent officer without a flicker of fear. Outside, the rain kept falling, but it couldn't slow the storm now sweeping through the internet. Shares appeared from every direction, long and short, posts spilling out alongside screenshots from the video. A girl from another state wrote, "I've never heard a line that hit me that hard." A man from the next city posted, "This isn't just a slap, it's a strike across all our faces." These words flooded screens, and the students at the cafe sat silent for a beat before nodding together. They knew they had helped unleash a wave no one could stop. One student sat still, hand wrapped around a now cold mug, whispering as if to himself, "That woman wasn't afraid. We shouldn't be either." The soft words spoken in the small space of the cafe sent a chill through the table. Each person felt something flare in their chest, a fire they couldn't name, part anger, part resolve. The line, "Slap me again. See what happens," echoed in their minds and then traveled farther, breaking past the walls carried along by the burning current of a digital world ablaze. The clip kept playing on the phone in the center of the table, and with every rewind the sound of the slap, the pouring rain, and Maya's clear, steady voice blended into a wordless anthem of resistance. It was no longer a private moment, it had become a call to action. People weren't just watching, they were connecting, sharing, turning it into collective strength. In less than an hour, the video had reached tens of thousands of views, then hundreds of thousands. Comments surged nonstop with angry and outraged reactions flooding the screen like a wave of red sweeping across the digital space. In that cafe, the group of students sat in silence, their eyes glowing with something new. They hadn't expected a shaky clip recorded in the middle of a rainy night to spark a movement. One of them gave a faint, nervous laugh. It all started with a slap. Another replied, eyes still locked on the screen. No, it started the moment she stood up straight, lifted her head, and dared to challenge him. The group fell quiet after that, then turned back toward the screen, where Maya Carter's image remained unyielding in the rain, and they knew that from this moment on the truth had been freed from the dark. Above the city, the rain had stopped, but puddles still dotted the streets, reflecting the shimmer of neon lights. At a major intersection, massive digital billboards suddenly shifted, displaying bold white letters against a black background, "Shez the Boss." It was more than a hashtag, it had become a new symbol, crystallized from the moment a silver badge was raised in the rain, with a voice that dared to defy authority. Passers-by looked up, many stopping completely to take out their phones and capture the image, wanting to preserve a moment that had just been publicly recognized as historic. Eyes lit up, and a few voices spoke aloud as if they had just found a banner to unite under. On social media, the momentum only grew more intense. Twitter flooded with videos from different angles, each capturing the slap, Maya's fierce stare, and the flash of her badge. Instagram was filled with stills from the clip, captioned, color-edited, and turned into spontaneous posters that spread at lightning speed. Facebook overflowed with comments, thousands of users sharing the clip in a single night, sending the feed spinning faster than it could keep up. Young people celebrated, older generations watched in stunned silence. Everyone was following a story that had blazed across the gray sky of injustice. A student in Chicago posted, "Maya Carter did what none of us dared to do." A mother in Atlanta wrote, "I want my daughter to see that image and know she can stand tall in the face of injustice." Not long after human rights organizations stepped in, their official accounts reposted the clip with bold statements of support. One viral post read, "This is not a personal moment. This is living proof of abuse of power that must end." An international organization went further, calling for a peaceful protest in front of the police headquarters demanding a transparent investigation and serious accountability. The image of the raised badge was printed onto online posters, then on paper, pasted to street corners and held up on signs during spontaneous marches. The atmosphere swelled with unity, a force that needed no organizer to move with conviction and power. Amid the flood of breaking news, one name suddenly appeared and quickly captured attention. A young journalist, known for covering past police violence cases, had decided to dig deeper into the story. His opening article was shared tens of thousands of times within hours, built around one simple question that sparked a wave of curiosity and concern. Who is Maya Carter really? That headline stirred the interest of everyone, from those who had seen the clip to those who had only scrolled past it. In the piece, the journalist described in detail the moment Maya stood tall in the rain, recounted her powerful words, and paused on the image of the silver badge, asking the central question about the true identity of this mysterious woman. That question was immediately shared and became a topic of widespread discussion. People wanted to know who she was, how she stood her ground so fearlessly, and what gave her such unwavering composure. As attention focused on Maya, public interest also turned back toward Cole's past. Old articles and long-forgotten reports were pulled into the light. One resurfaced piece mentioned a case in which Cole had allegedly assaulted a black teenager but faced no consequences. A local forum post pointed out that several complaints filed against him had mysteriously vanished after being submitted to the department. People uncovered grainy old video clips showing Cole during random street checks, aggressive and verbally abusive toward black individuals he had stopped. Each new discovery drove another nail into the already cracking image of his reputation. Public anger reached a boiling point, no longer confined to online posts, but spilling into the streets. A group gathered outside the local government building, phones raised, replaying the clip, chanting the slogan, "She's the boss." Portable speakers blasted Maya's words over and over, shaking the block. Local news stations cut to live coverage, airing footage of the video's spread. On screen, the sequence played again and again. Cole's raised hand, the slap, Landon, the silver badge gleaming, and Maya's defiant words ringing out. The anchor's voice trembled as she reported, admitting the story had far surpassed the boundaries of a personal altercation. Maya Carter had yet to make any official statement, but her image had already become the center of it all. People speculated nonstop, offering theories and guesses. Some believed she was an undercover agent, others thought she was a high-ranking officer operating under anonymity. But whatever her true identity, what united everyone was recognition of her visible courage. In Maya's silence, the public noise only grew louder. The theories multiplied, and within that noise, the power of her story continued to expand. In cafes, universities, and street corners, the clip played again and again, Maya's line echoing into the air and instantly becoming the starting point for passionate conversations. People asked one another, if it were me, would I be brave enough to say that? Someone else replied, it's not just a line, it's a truth we all need to hear. The hashtag "She's This Boss" appeared more and more, not only on digital billboards, but also on t-shirts, handwritten signs, and even spray-painted across walls. A slogan had been born, and it spread uncontrollably like fire catching wind. Late at night, the glow of digital advertisements still flickered non-stop, the words "She's the Boss" still shining bright, defying the dark clouds lingering after the rain. Beneath that light, people passing by stopped for a few seconds, stared in silence, then walked on with steadier eyes, because they knew they weren't just witnessing an event, they were part of a movement. And within that movement, Maya Carter had become the new symbol, while Cole was being pushed deeper into the shadows of public outrage and the investigations he could no longer outrun. Inside, a cramped dorm room, blue light from a laptop screen lit up the young faces gathered around it, each one tight with tension and anger. The rain outside had slowed to a faint drip along the roof, but no one noticed. Their eyes were locked on an old grainy video, the kind filmed on a first-generation phone, but every movement in it was enough to make their hearts ache. Cole appeared on screen, younger than he was now, but with the same stance, the same posture. He stood in an empty parking lot facing a thin black teenager, trying to explain something, hands raised in a show of harmlessness. Then, in a flash, Cole swung his arm and slammed the boy down onto the cold concrete. The dry crack of impact echoed from the laptop speakers, silence in the room. One student rewound the clip, eyes fixed on the boy being pinned to the ground, face twisted in pain, and whispered like a scream, "How did this never come to light?" Another answered, voice shaken with rage, "Because he's Cole." And back then, no one dared to stand up to him. The room fell quiet again, and only the sound of heavy breathing remained. They knew they were witnessing a missing piece of a bigger picture, one that made it clear the slap against Maya wasn't a sudden outburst, but the latest act in a long line of violence that had been overlooked, even protected. At the same time, on social media, an elderly woman appeared in a live stream. Her hair was silver, her face lined with age, but her eyes burned with fire. She spoke slowly, her voice breaking at times with emotion as she recounted how years ago Cole had threatened her. She was just a small shop owner then, and Cole had walked in, accused her of selling without a license, and handed her a massive fine. She knew she was innocent, but when she protested, he leaned in close and whispered coldly, "If you want peace, keep quiet. If not, I'll shut this place down for good." Her hands had trembled as she signed the papers. Her eyes filled with tears as she remembered ending with a line that left thousands of viewers in silence. "I stayed quiet, but I never forgot." The live stream spread like wildfire, shared tens of thousands of times in a matter of hours. People reacted instantly, and others began sending messages to forums recounting their own experiences. Some said they'd been pulled over by Cole without reason, searched and dismissed. One recalled being threatened with degrading language in front of their family. Each story added another piece to the puzzle, building a clearer portrait of a man who had long used his badge to intimidate and humiliate. Not only testimonies, but old news records also began resurfacing. Journalists, especially younger ones just entering the field, worked together to dig through archives, searching for stories that had once been cut or edited. Lines of text reappeared on screens, tiny articles buried at the bottom of pages from years ago, and when strung together they revealed a long trail of irregularities. One article from back then mentioned Cole's involvement in missing evidence during an investigation, and another briefly referenced a complaint filed against him for assaulting a detainee. But all of it had quickly vanished from the front pages, pushed to the bottom, or deleted entirely. Now, fueled by collective power, each of those scraps was dragged back into the light, copied, shared, and spread like wildfire across dry grass. Within just a few days, the evidence piled high. Forums were ablaze, the press had no choice but to dive in, and those who had stayed silent suddenly found the courage to speak. Old clips were stitched into a long compilation video collecting moments of Cole's violent behavior, accompanied by the caption, "This wasn't the first time." People no longer saw him as just one rogue cop with a temper. They saw him clearly for what he was, someone who had lived too long beneath a shield of unchecked power, enabled and protected. Photos of him from the past, standing smug in front of patrol cars, were now reinterpreted as proof of someone who had never changed, neither in action nor in attitude. Then, amid the storm, a new hashtag emerged, Cole Exposed. It spread nearly as fast as Shez the Boss, before it often paired together in new slogans demanding justice. People spray-painted walls with Shez the Boss, Cole exposed. Online, those words appeared everywhere alongside the resurfaced videos and reprinted articles. Thousands, then millions of shares pushed the public outrage to a breaking point. Those who had first seen Maya's video as a personal moment now understood it was the boiling point of a long, shadowy past, one that could no longer be hidden. In the dorm room, the group of students sat in stunned silence, their eyes wide as they watched the truth unravel. One of them finally whispered, voice shaken, "This isn't just about a slap anymore. It's about a whole system that lets him live like that." The others nodded, a glimmer of resolve in their eyes, because they knew the truth was finally out, and once it had been released into the world, it could never be buried again. That night, the sound of keystrokes filled the room. Notifications rang out non-stop, new messages, emails, posts. The city wasn't sleeping, and the country was watching closely as a man who once called himself the law now stood exposed beneath the full weight of the truth. Inside the police headquarters, the flickering fluorescent lights overhead cast uneven patches of brightness and shadow, a quiet metaphor for the widening divide within. The air was thick, a mix of old paper, stale coffee, and mildew, making the meeting room feel even more stifling. On the long table, cluttered with folders, officers sat together, yet their eyes avoided each other, each lost in private thought. A few quietly argued that Cole should be protected, that he had served for many years, that punishing him now would be like slicing into the organization's own flesh. Their words faltered, thinning into silence when no one offered clear support. Across the table, younger officers sat with fingers interlocked, eyes downcast, avoiding confrontation, fully aware that siding with Cole meant dragging themselves into a bottomless pit. Cole entered the room, his face still marked, red eyes sunken from sleepless nights, but his voice rang out, trying to hold its old authority. He slammed his hand on the table, causing folders and coffee cups to jolt, the sound echoing like a hammer blow. "Without me, you're nothing," he shouted, voice cracking with fury. Words that once silenced the room, once made others bow their heads in fear, now met only silence. The stillness weighed heavily, his own breathing thick, as if even the walls were turning their backs. An older officer, one who had served alongside Cole for years, glanced around the room and cleared his throat to speak, but when his eyes met the younger officers, he paused. Hesitation set in. His shoulders drooped slightly, fists clenched on the table, but not a word came out. The loyalty that had once existed was swallowed by fear and by the pressure from public outrage pounding on every wall of the precinct. Cole saw it all, the coldness in the eyes of those who once called him brother, the growing distance in the heavy silences. The old air conditioner hummed loudly, filling the dead space between them. One young officer leaned slightly toward another and whispered just loud enough for the two of them, "We can't let him drag us down anymore." The other nodded, a flicker of resolve passing through his eyes, though his voice trembled with fear of being overheard. They knew this crisis was now out of their control, but pretending nothing had happened was no longer an option. A few doors along the hallway creaked open. Curious faces peeked out, then quickly disappeared again. Rumors of the internal chaos were spreading faster than the footsteps of those carrying folders. Cole walked around the table, each heavy step landing on the tile floor with a dry, echoing thud. He looked at each person, searching for agreement for the affirmation he was used to hearing, but all he received were averted gazes. He scoffed, but the sound came out twisted, shaky, tangled in his ragged breathing. "You think cutting me out will fix everything? I'm the one keeping this city standing," he shouted. But the echo that bounced off the cold walls felt more like mockery than support. The room sank deeper into tension, each second stretching unbearably long. Those still inclined to defend Cole began to realize they no longer had the power to convince anyone. The silent ones understood that their silence had become a statement of its own, a distance between themselves and Cole that could no longer be bridged. Even the flickering lights, the damp air, and the rain tapping at the windows seemed to side with the truth that Cole no longer held control. In that suffocating atmosphere, a deep crack had opened inside the force, and with every desperate scream, Cole was carving it wider himself. Outside the precinct gates, the dim glow of streetlights couldn't hide the chaos taking shape. From every direction, small groups began arriving, phones glowing in their hands, voices rising with chants demanding the truth. The rhythm of footsteps joined with synchronized shouts, forming a growing wave that made the metal barriers tremble. What began with a few dozen people quickly swelled to hundreds within an hour. Some held up hastily written signs, others live-streamed the scene to the world, turning a shadowy street into the epicenter of public attention. Simple, powerful slogans echoed through the night, making the officers standing guard stiffen at their posts, eyes flickering with unease under the glow of phone screens. Inside the precinct, windows glowed brightly, becoming targets for hundreds of raised cameras and recording devices. Every flicker of movement behind a curtain was snapped, zoomed, and analyzed. The intensity outside was so thick that even a whisper inside could feel dangerously audible. Near the front, a group of young people pressed close to the barrier, chanting Maya Carter's name again and again, turning her into a living symbol even in her absence. The noise spread across the city, and on social media, images of the crowd outside the station multiplied as everyone seemed to want a place in this unfolding moment of history. Meanwhile, inside the conference room, Cole sat in his usual seat, but everything felt different. The noise from outside pounded through the walls like a hammer breaking his focus. He glanced around, searching for something familiar in the faces of his colleagues, but all he saw was distance. The eyes that once looked at him with fear now seemed cold, cautious. No one flinched when he glared, no one nodded quickly when he raised his voice. Instead, they remained silent, but their stares were like hidden blades slowly slicing away the last bit of belief he clung to. Cole felt the shift clearly radiating from the smallest details. As he walked, the hallways sophisticacy but no longer lowered their heads. When he called their names, they answered bluntly, their tone stripped of the respect that once came naturally. Their eyes carried doubt, contempt, and worse, detachment. He realized this was the first time his team saw him as an outsider, not a leader, but a burden they wanted to shake off. The chants outside still echoed. "She's the boss," Cole exposed, hammering his pride, carving into him a bloodless but searing wound. The room grew heavier than ever, the air so thick it felt hard to breathe. He shouted a curse, hoping to break the suffocating silence, but his voice rang out and met only stillness. No one responded, no one turned. Just the faint clicks of pens and the tapping of keys filled the space. Isolation wrapped around him like the dense fog surrounding the building, pushing Cole into a corner with no exit. In that moment, he understood power had abandoned him long ago, and all that remained was the contempt in his colleagues' eyes, a cold light exposing a man in freefall. Inside, a closed conference room of a glass-covered building in the Capitol. Bright overhead lights cast a sterile glow across the polished wooden table where thick stacks of documents were piled high. On the large screen at the head of the room, the video clip was being played for the 10th time each freeze frame, adding more weight to the already suffocating air. The moment Cole's hand struck Maya's face was clear, the sharp crack of the slap so loud that even the officials around the table flinched. A salt-and-pepper-haired man in a crisp suit slammed his pen down, his hand clenched white with tension, his voice hoarse. "This can't be buried anymore." That declaration cut through the room like a blade, forcing even the silent ones to look up with somber eyes. The other officials exchanged quick glances, some flipping open files, others sitting up straight, waiting for further direction. On the pages before them, Cole's name appeared alongside a long list of ignored complaints, old articles and blurry stills from resurfaced community clips. Together, they now formed an undeniable body of evidence laid out plainly in front of those who once believed everything could be swept away. A sharp-eyed young woman spoke up, slicing through the murmurs. "If we don't act now, the outrage out there will turn into something no one can control." Her words echoed silently, acknowledged by everyone present. Pens scratched across paper in rapid succession, triggering a wave of urgency. Documents were passed along, eyes scanning quickly, expressions shifting from anxious to resolute. An emergency investigation order was drafted on the spot, each bold letter marking a new boundary for the entire institution. On screen, the image of Maya in the rain reappeared, her badge raised before Cole, her eyes unwavering. That moment could no longer be dismissed or diminished because they all understood it was that silent defiance that ignited the storm now reaching this very room, and the storm would not pass if they continued to look away. When the final pen hit the table, the order was stamped with red ink, the sound echoing like a drumbeat, signaling the start of battle. Aides gathered papers swiftly. Phones buzzed nonstop with updates, and footsteps echoed down long hallways. No further words were needed, but in every pair of eyes there was understanding tonight would not be quiet. The order, just signed, carried weight not only for one man, but for an entire system riddled with hidden fractures. And in that moment, Washington officially stepped in, marking the beginning of an irreversible reckoning where the name Cole would be dragged into the light along with all the shadows behind it. As the freshly signed investigation orders were still being processed, Maya Carter's identity was suddenly revealed during a live news broadcast. Her face appeared clearly on the large screen, eyes steady and composed with a headline scrolling beneath Maya Carter, newly appointed Chief Federal Internal Affairs Inspector. The conference room fell silent for a brief moment, then heads began to nod in acknowledgement the truth finally brought to light. The woman who had stood calmly in the re-rain holding up the silver badge was in fact the figure entrusted with the task of monitoring and cleansing the entire law enforcement system, a position that carried not just a title, but real authority capable of shifting the balance. The broadcast replayed her confrontation with Cole. Each gesture, each word emphasized like a declaration, stirring a mix of admiration and emotion in millions of viewers. Police headquarters, the news spread faster than any internal memo. Officers who had hesitated now sat upright, while others whispered to one another about how they had unknowingly stood before a woman with real power, not just in a viral clip. The name Maya Carter flooded their phone screens no longer as a mysterious face, but as the one who would now oversee every misstep. Even those who had considered defending Cole fell silent, the truth too overwhelming to ignore. In the tense atmosphere of the station, the mood shifted, and every glance cast toward Cole now looked like it was aimed at a man who had buried his own career. Cole sat quietly in his office, newspapers and screens around him, all flashing Maya's name with words like resilient, tough protector of justice. Sweat gathered on his temples despite the steady hum of the air conditioner in his hands trembling slightly beneath the table. The door swung open, and a young officer entered holding a thick envelope, eyes lowered, avoiding contact. The summons was placed firmly on the desk, the sound sharp enough to make Cole flinch. He picked it up, eyes scanning the bold letters, each word landing heavy, draining the color from his face. In that moment, what had once been his pride now pressed down like a crushing weight. Cole felt as if every gaze in the hallway outside was aimed at him, each glance, each breath of a colleague tightening the noose. He tried to sit tall, tried to maintain composure, to look like a man still in control, but his face betrayed him, pale, stiff, and unblinking. His fingers clenched the paper into creases, lips drawn tight, but in his eyes the panic was unmistakable. For the first time there was no way out, and the name Maya Carter was no longer just a challenger in a video clip, but the one wielding authority, forcing him to face the consequences. And as the summons lay in his hands, Cole knew the road ahead held no more swagger, only a cold, dark night waiting for him to step into. The records vault lay deep beneath an old building, where dim yellow lights cast flickering beams over rows of dust-covered metal cabinets. The air was thick with the scent of damp paper aged through decades, and the sharp echo of shoes on the tiled floor made every step from the special investigation team bounce off the cold walls. Stacks of files, their spines darkened to deep brown and ink faded, but still legible, were pulled from drawers untouched for years. The yellow light swept across the pages, revealing official seal signatures and a flood of complaint forms long pushed aside. The team opened each file, eyes narrowed as they turned through page after page. Cole's name appeared with startling frequency, from brief reports to thick dossiers spanning dozens of pages. Some incidents listed specific dates, locations, and witness statements, only to end with the chilling phrase, "insufficient evidence." Other documents contained just a few lines describing assaults during detention, yet were stamped with no action taken. What once seemed like scattered fragments now formed a clear, damning chain exposing a long, dark history. Gloved hands flipped pages rapidly, notes scribbled down without pause, the investigators' stern eyes combing every detail like they were unearthing a long-forgotten grave. One thin folder slipped from the pile opening to a first page that held the testimony of a young mother from years ago. She described how her son was pulled over for no reason, searched, then beaten in the street, and the officer's name at the bottom was Cole. The final page still bore a blurred stain from tears, and the complaint had never received a reply. An investigator held the file tightly. His face darkened as he set it aside with others now marked for reassessment. Each discovery swept away another layer of dust, revealing scars the city had been forced to live with for far too long. In the corner of the room, a forgotten cardboard box was pulled out. Its lid popped open to reveal aged yellowed reports. Inside was a list of internal complaints, along with many handwritten notes from individuals who had once been threatened by Cole. All had been bundled into a single file and stamped "Case Closed." The yellow light reflected off the shaky handwriting, some scrawled in panic, some crossed out with bold red lines that buried entire stories. These pages read like silenced screams, now open to prove that the truth had never disappeared, only locked away in the dark. The sound of pens marking documents rang rapidly, each investigator carefully labeling cases, sorting piles of files into separate boxes, ready for reinvestigation. There was little conversation, but everyone felt the weight of those aged papers. On a makeshift desk in the vault, the stacks of documents grew taller, forming a mountain of evidence. Every page opened showed that Cole was not a one-time offender, but someone protected for years, leaving a long trail of shame. The weak, yellow light illuminated the focused faces, casting their shadows on the walls like new witnesses to a trial yet to happen. Outside, the city buzzed with protests and outrage, but down in the quiet of dust and paper, a rewrite of history was underway. When the final files were labeled, the air in the vault grew thicker, as if the room itself understood the truth unfolding would never return to darkness. And at that moment, each person present realized they were writing a new chapter, one where Cole would be forced to face what he once thought buried forever. Cole's name appeared so frequently in the papers that even seasoned investigators frowned. The list of complaints stretched for pages, ranging from minor incidents like traffic stops and verbal harassment to serious physical assault allegations. Each file contained a different story, every complainant a life scarred by the same man. As they pieced the documents together, his name echoed through the files like an ink blot spreading over every report. One investigator slammed his hand on the desk and said bitterly, "This isn't isolated, this is systemic." That comment weighed heavily in the room because they all knew the volume of complaints could not have escaped the notice of those in power for so long. The old complaint forms bore shaky handwriting, many stained with tears or sweat. Narrators described being searched without reason, beaten on deserted streets, or threatened in their homes. Below each account was Cole's signature factor in the report closure. Witness statements were often present, yet each file ended stamped "no action taken." That repeated dismissal laid bare a painful truth, that an invisible hand had allowed these abuses to vanish. As investigators reached page 20, then 30, they fell into silence, their eyes moving from shock to rage. They recognized that this list didn't reflect negligence. It was a deliberately hidden cover-up. While reviewing indicators of internal processing, one file drew particular attention. On several complaint forms alongside Cole's signature, there was a second signature familiar yet fading. It belonged to a senior former police official who had retired years ago. That name appeared no fewer than a dozen times, signaling that any complaint was quietly closed as soon as it surfaced. A young investigator flipped the page and sighed softly. He wasn't acting alone, he was protected. Those words silenced the room, confirming a lingering suspicion that Cole's abuse of power existed not just thanks to his aggression, but also because of an institutional safety net. An older investigator folded his arms, gaze distant, whispering as though to himself, "To bring him down, we must expose the shadow behind him." The room fell into silence for a few moments. Everyone understood Cole was not the only one being investigated, but a chain of authority that had shielded him was about to be exposed. The yellow light from overhead lamps cast onto the files, illuminating the scrawled and often shaky writing like age-old scars. Each paper was stacked, tagged, and gathered ready to be sent out as indisputable evidence. In the suffocating stillness of the vault, it was clear from this moment on the probe was not just about an individual, but about the powers that had protected him. Cole's name appeared so frequently in the documents that even veteran investigators furrowed their brows. The complaint list ran across pages ranging from minor infractions blocking vehicles, verbal harassment, to serious claims involving physical violence. Each file was its own story, each victim their own life, marked by the same man. When all compiled, his name repeated so densely it felt like black ink blotting across every document. One investigator slammed his palm on the table and said bitterly, "This isn't an isolated case. This is systemic." The weight of that admission pressed heavily. No longer could those complaints be hidden from the eyes of those in authority. The old complaint forms bore shaky handwriting, many stained with tears or sweat. Complainants spoke of being searched without reason, beaten on deserted streets, and threatened in their own homes. Beneath each statement lay Cole's signature closing the case. Some included witness testimonies, yet were stamped "no action taken." That steady pattern revealed a painful truth. An unseen hand had let these abuses slip away. As investigators filtered through page 20, then 30, silence reigned, eyes shifting from shock to anger. They realized the list was not the result of oversight, but of deliberate concealment. In a cramped interrogation room, the yellow light cast a tired glow across the wooden table. A camera, blinking steadily red from the corner, and a mic glowing in the center like an unblinking eye. The air was thick, breaths audible, every movement echoing. Across from a group of investigators sat a tall man in a worn shirt, face etched by time. A veteran, his eyes dark with memories that never let go. He inhaled deeply, hands clenched for courage, then spoke in a heavy, hoarse voice. "As soon as I returned from service, Cole stopped me in the street." He paused, eyes closed as if sinking into that memory, then continued. "He asked why I drove that old car, implied I was a thief. Before I could show my papers, he punched me in the chest and beat me down with his baton." Those words fell into a hushed room, broken only by the sound of pen scribbling. The veteran added that he still held his military ID and smelled of gunpowder. He raised it like proof, but Cole sneered, threw it down and stomped on it, saying, "You've got no honor here. Only I'm the law." His voice cracked with years of suppressed rage. He paused, fingers drumming the table as though holding back a lifetime of pain, then ended firmly. "I stayed silent for my family, but I never forgot that hand." The camera caught every expression. The mic's red glow punctuated each word, turning them into undeniable living testimony. The door opened again, and a middle-aged woman was led in slender frame, hands clasped in worry. She sat, and the chair creaked beneath her. Her gaze avoided the camera at first, then drifted into view. When asked, she remained silent for a long moment, throat-dry tears slowly falling. Her voice trembled. "He slapped me in the market, in front of so many people, just for asking why he stopped me." She raised her hand to her face, sobbing as the memory overwhelmed her. The investigators waited patiently, gently, prompting her to continue. Through tears, she detailed how Cole had looked her up and down, then unexpectedly backhanded her, sending her staggering. Bystanders cowered, a few helped her up, then backed away, leaving her trembling in their fear. He said that black women should know their place, or things would only get worse. Her words echoed through the room, broken, agonized, yet undeniably clear, and the room held its breath. The camera light still glowed, capturing every detail, every tear, as evidence etched in memory. When the woman finished her testimony, the room grew so heavy that everyone could barely breathe. An investigator slowly set his pen down, eyes flashing with restrained anger. 2 testimonies, 2 people, 2 stories, yet they shared a grim common thread: Cole as the harbinger of violence, contempt, and the mutilation of others' dignity and honor. The names on the reports now had voices, faces, and, crucially, undeniable emotion. Under the red glow of the microphone, the truth came alive in blood, tears, and indelible memories, marking a turning point in the investigation. Outside that interrogation room, Maya stood silently against the glass frame, her pale reflection reinforcing her resolve. She watched every statement, every teardrop, every tremor of the witnesses, yet her gaze never left Cole. He sat across from them, hands gripping the chair, his face masking calm, while his labored breaths betrayed inner turbulence. Each new accusation seemed to ripple through his body, his eyes darting before catching hers an unwavering stare. That fleeting eye contact wasn't merely confrontation, it was Maya silently affirming, "I won't leave. I will see this through." Maya's gaze remained cold, not harsh, but weighted with undeniable presence enough to choke Cole's usual authority. He had once used the power of his stare to intimidate, accustomed to others lowering their gaze. Now he turned away. Nearby, an officer noticed the contrast, an old power unraveling across from a symbol of unwavering justice. Maya needed no words. Her silent stance was a wall he could not breach. Her unwavering presence broadcast a message. This wasn't a solitary clash. It was the community's judgment bearing down on him. Outside that small room, the online world was ablaze. The interrogation clip leaked swiftly, the veterans and the woman's testimonies spreading like wildfire. The public began rallying behind Maya, not just as a witness, but as a flame of justice. Hashtag justice. For Maya appeared on one ordinary profile, and in moments swept across platforms accompanied by her powerful declaration and video stills. It ignited a flood unstoppable by any force. Young people adopted the hashtag as a declaration, pairing images of Maya standing tall in the rain with calls for change. Online articles quickly caught the trend, turning hashtag justice for Maya into bold headlines with tens of thousands more shares every passing hour. Human rights activists joined in unison, transforming the phrase into a full-scale movement. It was no longer about protecting one woman, but about defending the values she now stood for. Candles were lit in city squares, handwritten signs appeared bearing the same words, all echoing the voice of a rising collective. Inside the interrogation investigation room, Cole could hear the constant buzz of phones in the hallway, a sign that the story had outgrown these walls. He looked around, his face growing paler, only to be caught once more in Maya's steady gaze. Her eyes pinned him to the chair, offering no room to retreat. Outside, chants of justice for Maya began rising from small crowds, merging into the heartbeat of millions watching from their screens. In that moment, Maya didn't need to speak. Her name was already being carried by countless others, a relentless chorus that echoed across both the real world and the digital one. The holding cell was cold and stark, the white ceiling light casting a sterile glow on Cole's bruised face, blotches of red clearly visible beneath the indifferent shine. He leaned against the freezing wall, sweat collecting at his temples, despite the damp air raising goosebumps on his skin. On the metal table before him, a phone sat, waiting his only allowed contact, but each prolonged ring slicing through the silence felt like mockery. Cole dialed the number of a familiar politician, someone he'd once drunk with, shaken hands with in the shadows, someone who once assured, "Call me if it ever gets bad." But all he heard now was a monotone voice looping, "The line is busy. Please try again later." He tried another number, then another, but every call echoed the same cold result, as if confirming he had been erased from every list worth staying on. Rage surged. He slammed his fist against the table, the sound reverberating sharply enough for the guard to glance through the small window. Cole ripped the phone from its mount, gripping it tightly, veins bulging, his bloodshot eyes on the verge of bursting. For years, one call was all it took to quiet any storm. He was used to the protection of powerful hands, but now all was silent, letting him spiral alone. In despair, Cole roared, voice cracked and raw, tearing through the thick air. "I'll drag everyone down with me." The scream bounced off the walls, echoing down the hallway like a cursed vow. The officers outside heard it, but none moved. They exchanged brief, distant glances. In the past, every outburst from Cole triggered a rush to appease him. Now, he was just another name under investigation, a burden they all hoped to avoid. He saw it clearly, the shift, the silence that screamed louder than any conviction. His eyes dimmed briefly, then he forced a twisted smile, muttering bitterly that if he fell, those who once shielded him would fall too. In his mind, memories rushed in handshakes behind closed doors, envelopes passed in dim rooms, promises whispered with confidence, "You're safe." Now, those promises turned into blades slicing back at him. Cole thought about confessing, about pulling everyone into the spiral, proving he hadn't rotted in the dark alone. Anger and fear tangled inside him, driving him to pace the narrow cell, each step pounding against the cold tile like a beat of hatred, like an oath of vengeance. If he couldn't walk free, neither would those who let him roam unchecked. Under the sterile glare, his distorted face no longer bore the arrogance of a man in control, but the desperation of a cornered animal ready to lash out if only to draw one final breath. A young figure passed the iron door, pausing at the sound of screaming from inside. He was a junior officer, only a few years into the force, and there had been a time when he admired Cole for the toughness he embodied. But now, seeing the withered shadow of a man once deemed untouchable, the disappointment and revulsion in his eyes were unmistakable. Cole snapped his head up, desperate to find even a flicker of sympathy in the officer's gaze, but what he received instead was a cold, unwavering stare. The younger man spoke, voice barely loud enough to slip through the door's narrow gap, "You destroyed yourself." The words echoed in the cramped space like a verdict. They held no anger, no pity, only a frigid truth could not be denied. Cole froze his hands, gripping the bars, trembling. His mouth opened as if to scream, but no sound came out, only ragged breath and a twisted, broken smile. That short, calm sentence cut deeper than any scream. It pierced what little arrogance remained in him. Cole realized then that the distance between him and the new generation was beyond repair. He had dug the chasm himself with every cruel act. In that instant, he saw himself stripped bare, no longer cloaked in power but left as a man abandoned, standing alone. The sound of the officer's retreating footsteps echoed down the hall, leaving Cole in a silence that burned. Meanwhile, outside the cell, the storm of public outrage surged on. The clip of Maya facing down Cole continued to spread its view count, jumping by the hour, skyrocketing from millions to tens of millions. Major news networks broadcast live updates replaying the showing her badge was raised with the words, "Slap me again." See what happens now, visible everywhere from phone screens to digital billboards. People reshared the clip with searing commentary. Some called it undeniable proof of long-buried injustice. Others declared it a call to action. Online discussions exploded, each comment fueling the fire. One post read, "He didn't just slap a woman, he slapped an entire community." Another replied, "This is history. We must protect Maya." The momentum crossed borders. International outlets picked up the story, turning it into a global flashpoint. With every million views added, the weight on Cole grew heavier, and he knew with certainty every door to redemption had now been shut. Inside the cramped jail, Cole could feel the noise of the outside world through the hallway TV screen. He saw the view count on the clip, saw the flood of comments below, and his eyes darkened. Each rising number hit like a hammer strike, nailing shut the door he once believed would always remain open. The words, "You destroyed yourself," from the young officer merged with the distant uproar, becoming the final bell, tolling that his path had ended and there was nowhere left to turn. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation, and the murmurs of the crowd drowned by the relentless clicking of cameras. Flashes burst in rapid succession, illuminating every tense face from the public gallery to the press section, jammed wall to wall. The large door at the back swung open, and two officers led Cole inside. His hands were cuffed, his gait stiff as he tried to mask his unease. He took a deep breath, lifting his head as if still clinging to some sense of defiance. But each step landed heavy, his shoes striking the tiled floor, unevenly echoing a weary rhythm. Every eye followed him, piercing through the image of a man who once believed himself untouchable, now reduced to a faltering figure under the blinding spotlight of public scrutiny. Maya was already seated in the front row, her steady gaze fixed on the stand. The badge on her chest glinted under the overhead light, a sliver of brilliance in the charged air. She sat upright, hands clasped neatly in her lap, projecting a quiet strength that silenced those around her without a word. As Cole entered, their eyes met briefly, and that fleeting moment set the tone for the entire trial. Maya didn't shout or show anger. She simply looked unwavering with an intensity that made Cole hesitate mid-step before quickly looking away. Cameras clicked again and burst, capturing the exchange, amplifying it into a symbol of confrontation between a dark past and the emerging force of justice. Behind Maya, the crowd squeezed in, many holding up placards with stills from the viral clip slogans drawn from the now iconic phrase. No one spoke as Cole made his way to his seat, but the silence was heavier than any outcry, as if the entire courtroom were poised for judgment, a judgment society had already rendered before the legal process even began. Cole sat in the defendant's chair, his eyes lost in the blinding lights, lips pressed into a tight, rigid line. Inside, fear and fury, tangled though outwardly, he tried to cling to the last threads of pride. In front of him, Maya remained still, her presence alone, a barrier impossible to breach. Everyone in the room sensed the imbalance, and it was that invisible gulf that shrank Cole in the very space he once believed was his domain of power. Cameras were lowered, but lenses stayed fixed, every eye turning toward the bench where justice was no longer an abstract concept but a reality unfolding in front of them. Cole lowered his head for a brief moment, then forced it back up, but that effort didn't fool the eyes that had once stared him down in a storm. Maya was still there, a symbol of truth, and that contrast made it clear to everyone in the room this wasn't just another trial. It was a moment that would redefine a community's belief in justice. Cole's lawyer stood, adjusted his tie, and walked slowly to the center of the room, his voice calm and steady through the microphone. He scanned the room, then turned to the bench opening with a firm statement. My client was pushed into a tense situation. That strike was not intentional violence, but an act of self-defense. The room filled with murmurs, some scoffing, others shaking their heads in disbelief. The lawyer pressed on, speaking at length about how Cole felt threatened, claiming the woman in front of him at the time displayed erratic behavior. Each word echoed through the tight space, only raising the tension further as everyone in the room knew the truth didn't align with the version being told. Cole sat motionless behind him, eyes flicking briefly to Maya, as if expecting resistance, then quickly looking away. The judge remained stone-faced, expression unreadable, though a faint flicker of displeasure passed behind the eyes at the defense's unconvincing argument. Nearby, reporters hovered over their shutters, ready to capture a defining moment. In the gallery, some hands lifted protest signs, others whispered, "He's lying." The tension built until it seemed even the courtroom stenographer's pen taps echoed in sync with the rising heartbeats. It all peaked as the judge gave a signal to replay the video. The lights dimmed, and a large screen lit up, filling the front wall. The moment Cole stepped out of his car, the sound of heavy rain filled the speakers, and then his hand came down hard across Maya's face. The slap rang out sharply, reverberating through every corner of the courtroom. The camera panned Maya's face in full view, a red mark blooming on her cheek, but her eyes remained calm and unshaken. The entire room froze. No one moved. Every gaze was locked onto the footage. Every sound in the clip, rain whined, and above all, the slap was magnified, turning into the most damning verdict yet. When the screen froze at the moment the silver badge was raised, a ripple of murmurs surged through the courtroom. People whispered, sharp breaths were heard across the room. A few reporters lowered their cameras, eyes flashing with both anger and disbelief. Cole's lawyer forced a weak smile, adding that the footage might have been edited or lacked context, but his voice faltered, drowned out by the wave of quiet protest from the crowd. The judge banged the gavel to restore order, but even he knew that the direct evidence had far surpassed any line of defense. In the front row, Maya sat motionless, her eyes fixed first on the screen, then back on Cole. She didn't need to speak the sound of the slap. The look in her eyes and the steady resolve captured in the video had said everything. Cole slumped deeper into his chair, pale lips drawn tight, a flicker of panic flashing in his eyes he couldn't hide. The screen went dark. The lights returned, but the echo of that sound still hung heavy in the air. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath once more, bracing for the collapse of the wall of lies Cole and those behind him had built for years. The gavel slammed down with a thunderous crack, slicing through the tension thick in the courtroom. All eyes locked on the defendant. Cole slumped in his seat, face, ashen hands clenched so tight they dug into the arms of the chair. His lawyer's weak defense had long since lost weight after the video replay, the jury's gaze, cold and public outrage now rippling tangibly through the room. Whispers rose like static wooden benches, creaked as people leaned forward, forming an invisible wall pressing in on Cole. The pressure mounted until the veins bulged at his temples, sweat glistening down his cheeks. He looked up, eyes wild, and suddenly shouted, voice splintering, "I slapped her because she thought being black meant she could order me around." The words exploded through the courtroom like a bomb, silencing everything in an instant. Every prior defense crumbled as Cole exposed his true self. Camera shutters fired in unison, capturing the raw, furious confession, while reporters scribbled frantically, knowing this was the one line no spin could erase. Maya, seated in the front row, remained composed, her eyes still locked on Cole, but now with a flicker of sorrow mingled with contempt. She didn't need to speak. He had dragged himself into the light in his own voice. After a stunned pause, the room erupted in fury. People leapt from their seats, fists raised, voices shouting, "Throw him out! Get him out of here!" Some sobbed. Others slammed the railings, pouring years of anger into their cries. The collective roar surged through the courtroom, overwhelming the guards' attempts to restore order. Even the judge's gavel couldn't cut through the storm. The rage of hundreds inside echoed the voices of millions outside, all who had waited years for this truth to be spoken. Cole scanned the crowd, panic flaring as he saw the contempt etched into every face. He yelled again, but his voice was swallowed by the rising wave of fury. An old colleague shook his head behind him, disappointed, while younger spectators raised their phones, streaming it live as the crowd outside joined in unison. The more Cole flailed, the more he revealed his desperation. In that moment, he wasn't a former officer, wasn't a figure of authority, but a man exposed est, cornered and drowning in the truth he himself had unleashed. The atmosphere in the courtroom turned into a storm, every shout rumbling like thunder. The jury maintained composed expressions, but their eyes were heavy, knowing this case had gone far beyond the boundaries of ordinary law. It had become a reckoning for an entire community. Cole, panted eyes, bloodshot hair matted with sweat, his body slumped as if drained of all strength. But the words he had just screamed still echoed like a black ink stain, bleeding across a page, rendering all attempts at denial meaningless. From that moment on, the trial left no room for ambiguity. The man who once believed himself to be the law had just confessed his truth in front of witnesses, cameras, and history. After Cole's bitter outburst and the courtroom's eruption, the judge brought the gavel down hard, 3 resounding strikes that slowly quieted the chaos. He sat upright, aged eyes sharp and clear, scanning the courtroom before settling on the front row. Maya sat there, unshaken, her face calm, as if she had long been prepared for this moment. The judge's gaze met hers. Not a word was spoken, but the recognition was louder than any verdict. It wasn't just a personal acknowledgement. It was the system itself recognizing a woman who had stood up and challenged the false authority that had weighed on the city for far too long. In those few silent seconds, an unseen power seemed to shift from the hand of the self-proclaimed law to the woman who once raised a badge in the rain. That look marked the end of generations of silence. It stirred hearts in the courtroom as if all present had just witnessed a historic turning point. Maya didn't bow her head, didn't smile. She simply held her calm gaze, then gave the faintest nod, accepting the recognition not for herself alone, but for all those whose pain had once gone unheard. Cole saw it, and his expression changed. The rage in his eyes faded into a quiet despair. He understood the balance had finally broken and no one would lift him back up. While the weight of silence still lingered inside the courtroom, the world outside had already begun to move. News outlets launched live broadcasts playing Cole's discriminatory confession and the judge's silent glance at Maya on loop. Across national news stations, a bold red headline appeared, simple but enough to shake the country. Big mistake. It wasn't a reporter's quote, but the roar of a public sentiment, the unified conclusion of millions after what they had just witnessed. It spread across every major outlet, then surged through social media, becoming the symbol of an undeniable collapse. Across public squares, massive electronic screens immediately lit up with the same phrase. People paused amid the traffic, looked up, their eyes glowing with the sense that justice was finally being restored. In countless cafes, tables were slapped and cheers erupted the moment big mistake appeared taken as the ultimate verdict against Cole and the powers that once shielded him. Reporters present at the trial instantly captured screenshots and spread the message across networks. Within hours, it had become a national slogan featured in major newspapers and international news channels, marking the moment Cole's confession fully unmasked him before the law. Inside the courtroom, the noise rose again after a brief silence, but this time it wasn't anger, it was agreement, acknowledgement that the truth had prevailed. Maya remained seated, composed as ever, while flashes continued to ignite, capturing every second. The judge's eyes narrowed slightly, then the gavel struck once more, a quiet declaration that justice wasn't just written in statutes, but lived in this very moment. Outside, the words "big mistake" had etched themselves into the public consciousness, not as a comment, but as a verdict without need for signatures, a revelation no authority could undo. Inside, the cold jail cell, under a harsh fluorescent light that bathed the gray cement floor, Cole sat motionless, his wrists locked in chains that bit cruelly. His face was sullen, orbit bones, darkened bruises, yet to fade, showing in stark detail he looked broken. Gone were the deferential footsteps and subordinate nods. Now he sat alone in crushing silence, each click of the closing iron door echoing like a verdict. Outside, news of his indictment spread with ferocity. News anchors opening with the same headline, Cole officially charged with assault and racial discrimination. The image of him leaving the courthouse, pallid and bowed, replayed across every channel. It had become a symbol of a man who once pretended to define justice, now utterly undone. From behind the bars, Cole heard voices drifting in from the guards' room anchors, listing charges that felt like hammer blows to his shattered pride. He once relied on alliances that fed his arrogance, but now each link in that circle had crumbled. Nobody dared publicly defend him anymore. Former drinking buddies and those who signed papers on his behalf were now named in official reports as accomplices. Their seals and signatures, once shields, were now weapons used against them. The disclosure reached everyone from mid-level officers to high command. Anyone complicit in covering up wrongdoing was named. Those familiar faces were printed boldly in papers under the headline, "Traitors Who Hid the Truth." The public read, raged, and saw this not only as Cole's reckoning, but the start of a sweeping purge. Inside the cell, Cole clenched his fists, lips taut, eyes vacant. Every name read aloud on the news was another blow shattering the fortress of influence he'd built, now reduced to rubble. In the streets, the air felt freed, not peaceful, but charged. Crowds gathered outside police headquarters demanding continued investigations into every remaining link. Phone flashlights formed a sea of light in the night, and placards multiplied. The indictment was not viewed as the finale, it was just the beginning. Every new broadcast, every headline emphasized one truth. Cole's fake power had fully collapsed, dragging down all who thought themselves untouchable. In the quiet cell, his eyes stared into the darkness, knowing no one was coming to rescue him. The price of years of abuse had finally arrived, unavoidable and devastating. Outside the courthouse gates, the atmosphere erupted the moment the official news was broadcast. People flooded into the central square, carrying banners, drums, and glowing candles. Cheers and shouts filled the air. Tight embraces were shared, tears streamed down cheeks, all forming an impromptu celebration no one had organized. Many held images of Maya raising her badge in the rain, not just as symbols of her victory, but of triumph for a community long burdened by injustice. News cameras captured thousands of hands, raised in unity, voices echoing into the night like a chorus, affirming that justice had found its footing. Yet, amid the joy, serious questions rose. Cole was only one part of the problem. A young protester shouted through a loudspeaker, "How many other Coles are still out there?" The square fell silent for a heartbeat, then erupted in agreement. People didn't just want to celebrate, they wanted deeper answers to see whether the system would continue its cleansing. In cafes and across social media, millions of comments appeared. "Today is historic," someone wrote, "but tomorrow is the true test." Another insisted that if reform stopped at Cole, the victory would ring hollow. Images of the candle-lit square, paired with the hashtag "How many other Coles," spread rapidly, becoming the new rallying cry. Human rights organizations pledged continued oversight, insisting justice should not end with one indictment. The public no longer accepted silence, they demanded change, rooted in accountability. Amid the rising energy, Maya stood on a small platform composed but radiating determination. She didn't raise her fist or shout, she simply said, "Justice does not end here." Her measured words sparked thunderous applause, the cheers sweeping through the crowd like rolling waves, reigniting the belief that the fight against injustice would go on. In that moment, the community no longer saw Maya as just an individual, but as a representative of millions yearning for change. The candlelight reflected on her face, revealing an unshakable spirit. While outside light and belief filled the air inside the prison, Cole sat silently in the cramped room. Cold concrete walls surrounded him, white light cast over his pale face, his lifeless eyes staring blankly into the void. The icy cuffs had left raw, red marks on his wrists. He hung his head low, his breathing heavy like a man who had lost everything without yet understanding how. For the first time, Cole tasted powerlessness, as everything he once relied on had vanished. No powerful hand reached out to lift him, no chant of support echoed anymore, only emptiness pressing in from all sides. His gaze was vacant, stripped of menace, stripped of pride, leaving only a vast darkness he couldn't escape. And in that moment, Cole understood that the illusion of power that once sustained him had collapsed completely, leaving him alone with the solitude and fear he had never before known. The night square was filled with light, thousands of candles lit like a shimmering sea of small flames, illuminating the radiant faces of people who had waited far too long for this moment. From all directions, citizens gathered holding up hastily written banners burning with conviction. "Justice is not a privilege." The phrase, repeated across every sign, every piece of cloth becoming a collective declaration from the entire community. Chants echoed strong and unified, spreading across the wide plaza and blending with distant church bells to create a harmony of determination and hope. The candlelight reflected in their eyes, turning them into a bonded force, no longer feeling alone in the journey for justice. On a makeshift stage, Maya appeared, walking slowly amid thunderous cheers. Her small frame stood out in the light of thousands of candles without elaborate clothing or need for an introduction. Her presence alone ignited the crowd. As she took the final step onto the wooden platform, the chant softened, replaced by an uncanny stillness. No one asked for it, but everyone fell silent, as if instinctively knowing this was a moment to listen. Maya stood upright, her gaze sweeping across every face, calm but carried in a strength that made the entire square tremble. She didn't shout or raise her hand, simply stood still for a few breaths, letting the night wind pass through the flames and the heartbeat of thousands speak in place of any opening word. Then Maya spoke, not loudly but clear and resonant. "We have witnessed a truth, and we have held on to it together. Justice is not the privilege of a few, but the right of all." Her words rang out, striking the hearts of those listening, drawing tears to many eyes. Her voice carried no bitterness, only unwavering resolve, transforming the square into a sanctuary of belief. The crowd raised their candles in unison, the flickering lights fierce and determined, a silent reply. The chants rose again, no longer scattered but unified, echoing justice for all. Justice for all. The voices bounced off the stone walls, carried down the neighboring streets, drawing more people in to join the wave. Reporters captured the image of Maya standing in the light, her eyes glowing with a sea of candles behind and thousands of arms raised before her. That image, shared across the world that same night, became the emblem of a movement, proof that truth can turn a single person into the voice of an entire community. In that moment, Maya was no longer the woman slapped in the rain, but the one representing the will of millions. She stood there, quiet yet resolute, letting her eyes speak the message that the journey ahead would be long, but no one would have to walk it alone. The square blazed with light. The chants roared, and in the flickering glow of countless candles, the community reclaimed its belief that justice would never be buried as long as they held on to it together. Maya stood still on the wooden platform, allowing the heartbeats and breaths of thousands to merge into a rare stillness. Then she slowly reached to her chest, and pulled out the familiar silver badge under the expectant gaze of the crowd. The candlelight reflected off the metal surface, making it shine bright, flashing like a star over the darkened square. That badge, once a piece of evidence in a rainy night confrontation, had now become a symbol of belief, a vow that justice would not be buried. Maya raised it above her head, her hand, steady eyes locked on the sea of faces before her. That image etched itself into everyone's memory, holding the entire square in collective breath before erupting into thunderous applause. The first chant rose from one corner of the square, quickly echoed from dozens, then hundreds of places, until it surged through the crowd as a unified roar. "She's the boss. Justice for all." The words rang out, rolling like waves, bouncing off the stone walls, layering into a thick chorus of sound. Without planning, voices joined in unison, hands raised high, candles trembling in the wind like lights dancing to the rhythm. The heat from thousands of flames combined, creating a warm current that gave everyone in the crowd an extra surge of strength. Reporters immediately captured the moment, lenses locking onto Maya, holding the badge high, framed by a sea of voices and golden orange light. Within minutes, those images were everywhere on news sites, social media becoming the new symbol of the rising movement. No one talked anymore about a slapper, about a single officer, but about the awakening of a community led by an unbreakable symbol. The chant, "She's the boss, justice for all," was no longer just a cry in a square, but a shared message for millions watching through screens. Amid the rising tide, Maya remained still, her hand steady on the badge, her eyes bright with purpose. She let the chant roll, let it echo through every corner of the city, let it seep into every room, every home where people were watching. In the shimmering candlelight, her figure blended into the crowd, yet stood out above all like the center of a circle of light. Young people pushed forward, phones held high, capturing the moment they knew would be remembered years from now as a turning point. That sound didn't just echo through the square. It carried into distant streets, into the homes where people lit candles in solidarity. On the large screens set up everywhere, images of Maya and the silver badge were broadcast, accompanied by the words, "Justice for all." Elderly people nodded. Children cheered, all merging into a shared current of emotion. In a sleepless night, the community found its strength, and Maya became the flame, lighting the way for that strength. As the chants kept rising and the candles kept burning bright, people knew that justice was no longer a distant idea, but something alive in this very moment. In the large lecture hall, the light from the projector washed over the white wall, replaying the moment that once shook the entire nation. The image of Cole raising his hand and slapping Maya appeared vividly, the sharp sound echoing through the room, leaving hundreds of students silent. No one said a word. Only the hum of the ceiling fan and the occasional dry swallow could be heard. At the lectern, the professor quietly observed the silence, then slowly spoke his eyes, digging into the crowd of students who really protects justice. The question wasn't meant to find a single answer, but to challenge the awareness of an entire generation seated before him. The hall remained completely still, and a few heads bowed as if in thought. Then, from the middle row, a young student stood up, his voice slightly shaky, but his eyes bright. He spoke clearly, each word carrying through the hall. Not the one holding the baton, but the one who dares to face injustice. The answer lit up the room. Many students nodded, and scattered claps quickly grew into a long applause. The professor smiled softly, knowing that the statement was not just an observation, but the culmination of everything this young generation had witnessed from Maya's case. On the screen, the footage continued to play, reaching the moment when Maya stood tall, her gaze unwavering, her hand raising the silver badge. Many students couldn't help but take photos of the frame. Some even stood up holding their phones high as as if to affirm they were part of the story. Whispered conversations broke out across the room full of admiration for Maya's courage and disdain for Cole's disgrace. A female student in the front row whispered to her friend, "She didn't just face injustice, she turned it into strength." The soft remark spread like a ripple, lighting up many eyes with pride as they looked at the screen. The professor stepped down from the podium, walking toward the student who had answered his gaze contemplative before turning back to the room. He emphasized, "You see, justice doesn't exist in a baton or superficial power, but in the courage to face the truth." Maya Carter did what many of us fear, and because of that, an entire community changed. Those words were written quickly into notebooks recorded on phones as if the students feared missing an important message. In that moment, the lecture hall was no longer just a place for dry theory, but a space of belief and responsibility. The students weren't only learning about law or society, but about the courage to stand up. Many whispered to each other that one day if they faced injustice, they would remember today's question and answer. The lesson wasn't on a textbook page, but on the screen in Maya's eyes, in the bold words spoken in the rain, and now echoed in the minds of every young person present. The hall shone not from lights, but from the quiet flame sparked in each heart. The entire lecture hall fell into silence after the student's answer. No more whispers, no more shifting chairs, only a stillness so complete that even breathing could be heard. Hundreds of eyes turned toward the screen where the image of Maya standing firm in the rain, her face marked by the slap, but her eyes still blazing, her hand, holding the silver badge high, was frozen for a few seconds like a painting. Everyone was drawn in, each young person sensing that this wasn't just a piece of recorded footage, but a mirror reflecting the responsibility they would one day have to face. No one needed to speak, but all understood that this moment would stay with them for a long time, marking a shift in their awareness. The professor observed the silence with bright eyes, knowing the lesson had reached his student's heart. When he turned off the projector, the room remained quiet. No one rushed to pack their books or stand up like usual. A female student sitting in the last row quietly set her pen down, her gaze still fixed on the now empty wall where Maya's image had been, as if it were still there. A group of students sat up straighter, their expressions solemn, clearly affected by what they had just experienced. The silence was no longer awkward, but full of reverence, a beautiful weight that everyone in the room was carrying together. The professor stepped back to the lectern, his voice deep and calm. "Today we didn't just learn about history, we helped write it. What you've seen will be remembered not as an isolated event, but as a lesson in modern justice." That sentence stood like an exclamation mark, affirming that from this moment on, Maya's story and Cole's downfall had gone beyond a courtroom and become the opening chapter of a new way of thinking. In next year's textbooks and lectures for generations to come, people would speak of a slap, a steadfast gaze, and a community that refused to stay silent. The class gradually came to life, several hands raised to speak. A law student said that from now on he couldn't look at his textbooks the same way because justice wasn't only in statutes, it was in the courage to stand up. A sociology student nodded, saying Maya's story was proof of the power of a community that when a small voice is heard by millions, it can change an entire system. These reflections no longer sounded academic, but like personal vows born from deep emotion. In that moment, the lecture hall became more than a place to absorb knowledge. It turned into a space of awakening where students saw not just what justice meant, but what it demanded. Maya's image lingered not on the wall, but in their minds as a reminder of what one person could stand for and what others could carry forward. The class ended in the glow of sunset streaming through the large windows, casting a quiet golden hue across the room. Students stepped into the hallway, still talking, still discussing, many jotting down reflections in personal journals or sharing them on social media. They knew they had just attended a special lesson one, where history and the present had merged into one. In the now empty lecture hall, the echoes of watchful eyes of compressed silence still lingered, and above all, the story had already become the opening chapter of a new era's lesson in justice. In the small living room, light from the old television cast a glow over the faces watching the news. On the screen, footage from the public trial played, showing the moment Cole shouted and was exposed before the public intercut with scenes of Maya standing firm in the rain. The room was heavy with silence, broken only by the anchor's voice emphasizing the upcoming verdict. A little girl sat on the sofa wide-eyed and innocent, never looking away from the screen. When the video replayed the harsh slap, she turned to her father, her voice clear but trembling. Why did the police officer hit her? The father sat beside her, his face solemn, hands clasped together on his lap. He looked into his daughter's eyes and answered slowly, his voice hoarse, because someone thought their skin color gave them power, but not anymore. The answer brought a hush to the room. The girl sat still, lips pressed tight, trying to understand something beyond her years. The mother placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder, her eyes firm yet gentle, as if to say that the road ahead would be different now that the truth had been laid bare before the world. The broadcast continued, showing the candle-lit square, the chant "Justice for all," echoing through the speakers and stirring the entire family. The father leaned back in his chair, sighed, then shook his head as if reflecting on the past years when he had believed silence was safe, when injustice seemed distant and unchangeable. But now, in front of his daughter, he could no longer stay quiet. He whispered, half instructing, half confessing, "We have to teach her that fairness doesn't come from a uniform or a badge, but from how we treat one another." The girl nodded, her eyes brighter, as if she had just grasped something important. The mother leaned in and held her close, her voice steady. "Remember, when you see someone being mistreated, speak up, because if you stay silent, injustice grows." Her words made the girl look up with a budding sense of resolve in her eyes. In the soft blue glow of the screen, the image of the three sitting close formed a quiet bond, as if this moment had awakened in them a shared responsibility as a family to the world beyond their walls. The news ended and the program changed, but the room stayed quiet for a few more minutes. The father stood, turned off the TV, then looked back at his wife and daughter, his voice low. "Tomorrow we'll go to the square together and light a candle. You need to see you're not alone." The girl smiled faintly, a nervous but excited smile. The mother nodded, her eyes filled with pride. They understood that from this moment on, justice was no longer a distant concept on a screen, but something that had entered their home, taken root, and begun to shape a generation that would stand tall and face the truth. The mother pulled her daughter close, wrapping her arms tightly around her as if to pass on an unshakable belief. She looked directly into those innocent eyes, her voice slow but firm. "We must teach you to stand on the side of what's right." The words echoed in the small room, carrying the weight of a vow. The girl nodded softly, her tiny hands gripping her mother's, her eyes lighting up as if something inside had been ignited. The father sat across from them silently, watching, his face serious, but in the corner of his eyes flickered a glimmer of hope. He knew that in this moment the family had crossed into a new place where truth was no longer hidden behind closed doors, but affirmed in every word spoken, every look exchanged. Outside the window, the sound of protesters' chants rose and fell, blending with the steady beat of drums like the heartbeat of the city. The echo carried down every street, slipping through the cracks of every window, making the air in the room seem to vibrate. The father moved to the window, gently pulling back the curtain to look down at the street. Under the glow of streetlights, streams of people marched by holding candles, raising signs, shouting demands for justice in unison. He saw their unity and felt as if the whole city was breathing in sync. Turning back to his wife and daughter, he smiled slightly and said, "They're continuing the story we just saw on TV." The little girl ran to the window, her eyes wide as she watched the flickering lights below. In the voices ringing out, she heard every word clearly, felt the strength of a crowd refusing to stay silent. Her small hand gripped her mother's tighter, a strange but thrilling feeling stirring in her chest. The mother bent down and whispered, "That's proof that when one person dares to face injustice, the whole community community stands behind them." Those words made the girl's gaze even steadier as a new and deep awareness began to take shape within her. The small room suddenly felt larger as the chants outside echoed through every beat. It was no longer just a private family space, but had become part of the city's pulse. The father placed his hand on his wife's shoulder, his voice warm. "Tomorrow, we'll take her out there. She needs to feel what it's like to stand with others." The mother nodded, her arms still around their daughter, her eyes fixed on the blinking lights outside as if she could already see what lay ahead. For them, teaching their daughter to stand for what's right wasn't just a lesson spoken at home, but a lived experience out where she could see that justice lives in every chant, every step, every flickering flame. The sound of the marching crowd continued to echo, blending with the heartbeat of all three. They sat together listening to that sound like the background music of a sleepless night. The mother gently patted her daughter's back, whispering that the light out there would keep burning along as someone kept it alive. The girl closed her eyes, her face resting on her mother's shoulder, the words still echoing inside her. Outside, the city kept roaring, the voices of protest reasoned like a heartbeat, steady, vibrant, relentless, declaring that what is right had found its place in every person and now pulsed powerfully within an entire community. Morning returned after nights of upheaval, golden sunlight pouring down the street where once blared sirens pounding rain and the slap that sparked an entire social storm. Now, the street appeared strangely peaceful, windows open to welcome, the light trees along the sidewalk swaying in the early breeze. On the pavement, once marked by footsteps and spilled blood, Maya Carter appeared walking calmly, no longer in her formal uniform but in simple clothes. In her hand, the silver badge still gleamed, needing no display but carrying the weight of a symbol. Passers-by turned to look, recognizing her, then smiled gently, their eyes lighting up as if reminded that justice was real and walking among them. Maya stopped in front of the building that had once been the epicenter of protest, where hundreds had raised their signs, where the press had crowded to capture every detail. The cold stone walls were now warmed by the morning sun, softening the gloom that had once haunted many. She looked up, her gaze distant, yet composed, proud, but quiet, as if sending a message that this victory wasn't hers alone, but belonged to everyone who had dared to rise. Her eyes held no hatred, only the calm of someone who had walked through the storm and knew the journey was just beginning. A group of students passed by, recognizing Maya quickly, bowing their heads and greeting admiration shining in their eyes. She nodded gently, then remained still, as if speaking to the past of this very place. That morning's newspapers featured bold headlines, "Justice is not a privilege." Articles recounted the journey from the rainy night to the closing of the courtroom, from the moment Maya raised her badge in defiance to when the crowd chanted in unison at the plaza. Commentators emphasized that the story didn't end with a verdict, but served as a wake-up call that justice must not be limited by skin color or power. These reports aired repeatedly, but Maya didn't need to read them, for she had already seen the change in the eyes of those passing by, and the confident smiles of children, and the silent determination of grown-ups. She stood there, letting the sunlight reflect off the silver badge, scattering tiny rays like a reminder. In Maya's mind, what echoed wasn't Cole's furious outburst or the crowd's rage, but the image of flickering candles in the square, the question from a young girl in a distant living room. Why did the police slap her? And the simple yet profound answer, because someone thought skin color gave them power. But not anymore. Those sounds and images strung together, making her realize her actions had become a lesson far beyond any single incident. On this morning's street, the breeze carried the sound of people chatting, mixed with the rhythm of passing footsteps. Maya took a deep breath, her shoulders relaxing, letting the calm settle over her. She knew there were still challenges ahead, had shadows waiting to return, but she also knew that justice was no longer a luxury. It lived in every gaze and every chant in the solidarity she had witnessed firsthand. As she turned away from the courthouse, a faint smile touched her lips, and Maya understood one thing clearly. Justice was not a privilege to be granted, but a fundamental right every human being deserved, and it was her responsibility along with the community's to ensure that light never faded. In the moment, Maya stood silently in front of the building. Morning light poured down, casting a golden glow over the entire scene. Everything seemed to pause, giving way to a voice that rose up warm yet resolute, echoing through the space. Justice doesn't lie in the hands of those in power, but in the hands of those who dare to hold on to the truth. That voice rang out like a final statement, a message to both present and future. It targeted no individual but spoke to all, a reminder that justice is not something handed down from above, but something built and defended by ordinary people who choose to rise against injustice. The voice drifted through windows and doorways, touching the hearts of those who had followed the story from the beginning, making them feel they were part of the shared journey. The sound made people nearby look up, some pausing, mid-step eyes thoughtful. Among the faces were the young, the old, even children holding their parents' hands, all listening, as if the voice wasn't just a message, but a vow. That sentence captured the entire journey from the rainy night and that stinging slap to the explosion across social media, from the packed courtroom to the candlelit square. Every step, every event, every drop of blood and tear had built up to that simple, powerful affirmation, sending chills through those who had long waited to hear the truth spoken aloud. On the sidewalk, Maya remained still, her hand gently resting on the silver badge. In the golden sunlight, that small object blazed like a flame, its reflection scattering across the pavement. The final image etched into people's minds wasn't of angry faces or Cole's downfall, but of the badge gleaming in the peaceful morning. It became a symbol of endurance, a legacy that couldn't be erased. Passers-by stopped to quietly take photos, then shared them far and wide, turning that light into a shared symbol, a reminder that justice had found its place and must be preserved. Somewhere in the city, on large public screens, that image was replayed, accompanied by the very words that had just echoed. People paused in the middle of traffic, looked up, their eyes filled with emotion. They didn't see Maya as a lone individual, but as a witness to the truth, and the badge in her hand was proof that justice never disappears. It is merely hidden until someone dares to lift the veil. In the wind, rustling through the trees and the light reflecting off glass buildings, that image blended with the city's heartbeat, etched deep like an unerasable mark. And as the sunlight continued to stretch across the streets, the badge still shimmered as if illuminating the road where it all began. There were no more shouts, no more chaos, only peace, soaking into every ray of light. That image closed the story, but also opened a new chapter where everyone could understand that justice endures only if they work together to protect it. That legacy didn't belong to Maya alone, but to everyone who believed, who spoke up, and who would continue walking forward so that the light of truth would never go out. The story came to a close on a sun-drenched street where Maya Carter walked with her silver badge gleaming, leaving a lasting impression of the journey for justice. From the moment she first faced Viley to the unveiling of the truth in the courtroom, society had witnessed a wave of events that exposed not only a fallen individual, but the layers of power that once shielded him. The slap in the rain was no longer just a personal act. It became a wake-up call, forcing the community to reconsider how justice operates and what truth truly means when upheld with courage. Cole once believed that a uniform and a baton were enough to make him the law, But what happened proved that such power is fragile when built on contempt and oppression. He was exposed by his own aggression, and his downfall didn't happen only in the interrogation room or the prison cell, but in the distant looks of his colleagues, in the angry chants of the public, and in the unraveling of every hidden document. Cole became living proof of one truth: the longer evil is tolerated, the heavier the price to be paid. Maya Carter didn't win with force, but with steadfastness and the strength to stand tall. She turned silence into resistance, a few words into a declaration, and the badge in her hand into a symbol of truth. She didn't need to rally crowds or claim the spotlight. She let her actions and gaze speak, compelling millions to find their own voices. Maya's greatest strength wasn't in her position as Chief Internal Affairs Inspector, but in how she helped the entire community realize their shared right to defend what is right. The lesson spread even further as society began to confront the question: how many other Coles are still out there? It wasn't a complaint, but a wake-up call that justice cannot stop at a single trial. It must continue in every conversation, in every household, in every classroom where younger generations are taught. Truth must be protected and injustice must be confronted. The father, in a small room, told his daughter that skin-colored power was over. The mother held her close and reminded her to stand for what's right, and the crowd in the square shouted in unison that justice belongs to all. From classrooms where students debated to candlelit squares to the millions of screens replaying Maya's image, an invisible thread began to link people together. That thread was woven from the belief that truth can be blocked but never erased. And as long as someone dares to uphold it, it can grow into the strength of an entire community. It was that strength that kept the public from letting the story be buried, pushed institutions into action that forced the once silent to finally face the truth. Justice in this story didn't come from the final verdict, but from the process of people exposing the truth together. Maya was the center, but the community was the wall that stood behind her. The final image of the badge in sunlight didn't just mark a symbol, but a legacy of spirit that justice is not a privilege, but a fundamental right for everyone. Anyone, no matter their position, who holds on to the truth and dares to speak out can help shape change. When this story is told again, what remains will not just be the fall of an abuser of power, but the awakening of a society of every family, every generation. The greatest lesson is that justice doesn't reside in the hands of the powerful, but in those of ordinary people who dare to stand tall and refuse to be silent. And as the light shines down, the badge still gleams, reminding everyone that this legacy will continue to guide anyone still fighting to ensure justice never disappears.